Can you believe this CBR 1000RR used to look like this?
Well, you probably can, because it doesn't look much better right now.
But today, that all changes.
The swing arm, fork and subframe damage to the CBR was so bad that the insurance company deemed it unrepairable. I, however, took a chance on it and bought it for just $3,000 at auction.
2018 Fireblade for sale?
We've since found a dirt cheap second-hand swing arm, had the forks repaired, and got completely ripped off by Honda for a new subframe.
$1,900.
We've also found a second-hand headlight and replaced all sorts of small damage along the way. But this means we've only got a little over $2,000 left in the budget to get this bike done.
And as you can see, we've still got a long way to go. I'm not sure if it's even possible. But no matter what, we're finishing it and riding it today.
Thank you to Insta360 for sponsoring this video.
Okay, so I've been making a list of what still needs to get done before we can ride it. There's the obvious stuff like the swing arm and the wheels, the less obvious stuff like the handlebars, grips, bar ends, new frame sliders, and of course, coolant. There's important stuff like the intake air ducts, and the aesthetic stuff, the fairings. However, right now, I'm still waiting for the swing arm and wheels to get back from paint. But instead of wasting more time, I'm gonna try and get odd jobs done while I wait.
The first mission was some quick cleaning, because everything back here from the linkage to the heel guard to the frame is covered in thick layers of chain lube, and it will never be easier to get to than right now when the swing arm is out. Plus, it's now about 10 pounds lighter without all that chain lube. Then of course, it still needs some coolant before we can ride it, which is an easy enough job. Although this silly fill neck that isn't built into the radiator makes it even more difficult for trapped air to escape, but makes nice babbling brook noises as a result. Fortunately, there weren't any leaks, so I could fire it up to bleed any air out, which just left the reservoir to be filled that is actually behind the engine, just above the swing arm pivot. At first, I thought this was a terrible place for it, but I don't suppose there is a good location on sport bikes covered in fairings. When I got the bike, the left handlebar wasn't straight, and I assumed it had been bent in the crash. I'd even planned on cleaning up the race clip-ons I took off my R1 and using them on the Honda. But since reinstalling the handlebars when I worked on the forks, it no longer looks or feels bent, so maybe it just moved around the fork in the crash. Nevertheless, I began removing the top triple clamp, the switch gear, the grip, and loosening off the clutch lever so that I could slide the handlebar off the top of the fork tube to get a proper look at it. And to my surprise, it's straight. So I called that a win, and back together it went, but this time with new grips. Since the old ones were torn from the crash and have this awful squishy foam over them, trying to eliminate any feedback the bike wants to give you. I did the same thing on the throttle side, and since the other red bar end was lost in the crash, I needed a replacement option. GFP were kind enough to send me some cool lever guards for free to get that race bike look, and after bolting them on and adjusting the length, it definitely looks faster. But of course, it still gets added to our running total. Now for the air intake ducts. These ducts funnel the air through these holes on each side of the frame into the airbox. However, my bike only came with this left-hand one, and it's broken. It's not your average intake duct either. Just look at the weird resonators attached to it. So here's what $500 worth of replacement intake parts look like. Don't buy a Honda, kids, they're expensive. Buy a Yamaha instead. But this should be everything we need, including seals, resonators, clips, and the ducts. So I started disassembling the intake I had to see how it all fits together, and because I can reuse that triangular resonator, saving us some money. They're not difficult to put together, The only challenge is getting the stiff new seals to seat. And then they simply slot through the holes in the frame into the airbox, and you can see where it will bolt to the headlight later on. Now to fix one of my screw-ups.
My front sprocket cover also has a giant hole in it. I don't think that was from the crash, but I don't like it. So we've got this brand new one to replace it with, which means we have to take this shift shaft off. That's okay, because someone also commented that I installed the gear lever the wrong way around. And they're not lying. No idea how I did that, but it's gonna be quite hard to reach like this. So let's fix it.
Luckily, this is a harmless screw-up that's easy to fix, but it's a good reason to never rush working on a bike. I ended up having to remove the shift linkage entirely to get the sprocket cover off, but I think buying a new cover was also easier than cleaning the chain lube off of the old one. I also made sure to clean this metal case saver type thing before putting it back together the right way this time.
And perfect timing. Right as I was finishing up all of those small jobs, our parts are back from paint. And they look incredible. So this was our second-hand swing arm, and although it was in much better condition than the one that was on the bike when it crashed because there's no holes in it, it did have some normal wear and tear and scuffs on it. So this has been redone in satin black to look OEM, exactly like it would be out of the factory. But to be honest, a bit better because it's been sandblasted, so there's not a speck of dirt on this thing, and all the warning labels and the label telling you how to adjust your chain have also been taken off. So it looks way better. So if you don't know how to adjust your chain, this probably isn't going to be the bike for you. And remember, the paddock stand spool, the threads for it on this side were welded back on, and now that it's been redone, you can't even tell. And now for the wheels. Yes, they are burnt bronze, and I've wanted burnt bronze wheels on a motorcycle since my MT-09, and I've just never made it happen.
They have a really rough finish that's durable and almost sparkles in the sun. Plus, now the wheel shape is way more noticeable than it was in black, and all those busy CBR logos are gone.
So this was done by Noldo from Scarlet Customs in Pretoria, so if you need any paintwork or customization, check out his details down in the description. He offered to do all of this for free, and I took him up on it because he's a very nice guy, and I've never met anyone more passionate about motorcycle paint and customization in my life.
The man is an artist and a jack of all trades because he even fixed the slight wobble in the front wheel as well as the curb rash. I'd show you the fix, but I can't find it. And for a normal customer, this would cost around $300, which isn't bad at all. The brake discs had a layer of rust forming, and everything else was just greasy and dusty, so I took care of that first, before reassembling the wheels. But the best part was that I didn't have to worry about wheel bearings. And once the ABS rings, brake discs, and tire valves were back on, I could get new tires mounted. I went with these Dunlop Q3 Pluses since they're supposedly sporty and relatively cheap, but I haven't ever tried them before, so it'll be interesting. I decided to put the front wheel back on before installing the swing arm, in the hopes that it would make the bike more stable. However, I still had to jack the bike up slightly because my jack stands were a tad low to get the wheel in. But how good does that wheel look? I could then turn my attention to the swing arm. The old one still had the chain guard and chain slider that needed to be transferred over. But obviously, they also had a thick layer of chain lube to be cleaned off first. I also remembered that the chain adjuster bolts would probably come in handy in the future, as well as some new paddock stand spools since the old ones got damaged along with the swing arm. And then it was ready to go on the bike. This was a new challenge for me since I've never installed a swing arm before. I quickly worked out that it wouldn't go back in the way it came out, and had to unbolt the shock from the linkage and slide it into the swing arm from the top. I also played around with every arrangement of linkage bolts to find the one that allowed for the most movement. There's even a hose that has to go through the hole in the swing arm just to make things trickier with only one set of hands. But eventually, I coaxed it into the frame and got the pivot in. With that done, I bolted the rear set back on that I'd loosened for extra wiggle room, and then it was finally time to ditch the jack stands for a paddock stand once again. I have to say, putting a rear wheel in without a chain is definitely the way to go, so I hope we get Wi-Fi chains soon. It also spins a lot easier without that added friction. And I'll say it again, how good do those wheels look, especially with the matching engine covers. But now that we have straight forks and the wheels are back on, I could finally do a wheel alignment test to see if the frame is twisted at all. And fortunately, even from this perspective, everything checked out, so I could get back to work. I opted for a new X-ring chain since I had to cut the old one off, and made sure to clean off all the sticky grease that they ship with first so that it doesn't fling onto my new wheel paint. Although the manual says we need 116 links and this is a 120 link chain, I still wanted to make sure before cutting. It's obviously recommended that you change sprockets too when getting a new chain, but these sprockets don't look too bad and we're on a budget here. Once I'd gotten rid of the extra 4 links, I could reroute the chain and install the master link with the supplied grease and X-rings. I even had to buy a chain tool since I've only ever done dirt bike chains in the past with the clip style master links that are a lot easier but won't quite cut it with 180 horsepower.
So, the bike is already looking a million times better, but this big box is the final piece of the puzzle. Thanks to a motor part, we finally have fairings for the bike. You might have guessed the color scheme already, but it's white, black, and bronze, and I think it's going to look awesome. A motor part were not only kind enough to supply these fairings to me for free, but also give you guys a discount code, Chaos Causes, to get 10% off if you also need new fairings. But as always, I will still add this price to the total just to keep things fair. And we obviously also got all our new black trim pieces with that, with the exception of the tray in the subframe and the rectifier cover. So I'm very glad that I bought that from Honda when I did, otherwise I'd still be waiting. We also got a bolt kit with some nice black hardware that's going to look great up against the white and black paint, as well as some heat shield. And then obviously it doesn't come with a mudguard, a rear mudguard, so I'm really glad that I still have this one. We can clean it up and reuse it. The same as my R1, it never came with a rear mudguard.
I decided to start with the tail, mostly because I didn't want to deal with the wiring by the headlight just yet, and the tail was surprisingly easy. There's just a piece under the tail, and I remembered to install the rear seat lock before I put the tiny little piece that covers the brake light on and the top section. Then I moved on to the tank cover, which consists of quite a few pieces, so I used the broken one as a guide. I assumed these were all the necessary pieces and put the cover on, only to realize that the side pieces for the badges needed to be put on first as well, so off it had to come. But after faffing with that, it could go back on for good, and then I could pry the Honda badges off of the old fairing with the help of some heat, and stick them onto our new fairings, making sure the wing was upright, otherwise it can't fly down the road.
Now I think we are ready for some seats because this whole area is finished. So if you remember, our seats were torn in the crash. The back one was actually worn down into the base, into the plastic here. So they did try to build it up on the edge. You can actually see it if you look closely, but we've tried to use material that's very close to stock. So these look brilliant. The front one is as good as new. But since we're not running rear foot pegs on this bike and the fairing kit comes with a seat cowl, I think we should go that route for now. Always an option though.
I may have spoken too soon though, because after putting the trim piece on the cowl, I couldn't get it to latch properly for anything. So I think we'll stick with the seat then. it doesn't look bad with the Stormtrooper look anyway. And obviously, I had to take my first opportunity to sit on it as an uncrashed bike, which was the motivation I needed to tackle the wiring at the front. I removed the mocked up headlight and started to figure out where all the wires had to go. After all, the front of the bike was destroyed when I got it, so I never got to see where it all went. But luckily, there were still pieces of broken plastic bolted to some parts, which helped me figure out where it was supposed to be. Now that I knew where it all had to go, I thought I'd just quickly throw the front mudguard on, but even that had a curveball. Swapping the rubber grommets over was quick and easy, but there are these little brackets that you can bolt the brake lines to that are riveted into the mudguard. So I had to drill those out and rivet them into the new mudguard, and then I could finally bolt it on. While I was tackling mudguards, I cleaned up the rear hugger by pulling off the red stickers that don't match and bolted it to the swing arm. Then it was finally time for the front end. If I had to do this again, I'd be a lot faster, but figuring out the correct sequence wastes a lot of time. The headlight slots into the stay bracket and then bolts to the intakes, but while putting this trim piece on the headlight, I realized I wouldn't be able to get to the bolt for the front fairing like this, and that it had to be done off of the bike. Nevertheless, all that faffing was worth it when it started to look like a CBR.
Now we need to salvage the mirrors, and to be honest, this was a bit of a tricky one because these are destroyed, but they cost about $250 each. So for that price, you could easily get some bar end mirrors and a way to replace the turn signals, and it would be pretty easy and cheap. But the problem is that this one isn't broken. So I kind of figured maybe we could salvage this, and the turn signals in each of these is still fine, and you can buy all of these in about 3 separate pieces. So that's what I tried to do. I've got this broken cover here to replace, the same on this side, and of course this whole section here, which is the most expensive part because it's even snapped off on the mirror stalk here. That's what's in this box. So now we just need to assemble them.
Well, there goes our budget. The right-hand mirror was fast because just the turn signal had to be swapped over to the new cover and clipped back together. The left one was a tad slower, as I had to reroute the wiring through the new mirror, and essentially all 3 parts were rebuilt. I remembered at the last second that the windscreen has to go in before bolting the mirrors down, and as you know, I'm not a blacked out windscreen fan. But yeah, I got no excuses here. It came with the kit. But the good news is that once I plugged the mirrors in, they flashed at the correct speed. Then for the side fairings, which were a little tricky due to the frame sliders. I had to remove the slider, build up the fairing panel, and then loosely install it to mark where to drill. Then, with it all taped over, I used a step drill bit to drill it just 2 mm wider than the diameter of the frame slider's shaft. And that was the easy side. The left side frame slider has been used, so I couldn't even see the bolt. I tried using a screwdriver and pliers to get some of the material out, but even so, I couldn't get a socket in there and had to turn to power tools instead. But now, with the smell of burning birthday candles in the air, I could at least remove the slider. I actually liked the look of these frame sliders, and I'm superstitious about removing sliders from a bike that has them. So I bought a new set, and that just left the belly pan. The bad news is that we're keeping the fake SC project, but the good news is that once I'd installed both sides of the belly pan and a few trim pieces, I could put the bike on its wheels for the first time in 52 days.
Well, here it is. It's not completely finished. There are still a few issues that I'll get to in just a minute, but this is the moment that we've been working towards for the last 2 months. And it's a pretty good looking moment if you ask me.
And since I've built this bike, I made sure to mount my Insta360 X4 to the bike to capture my big win or dramatic failure. The X4 offers the widest field of view possible in beautiful 8K. It automatically gets rid of the pole it's mounted to, and you can mount it in any orientation, then just reframe your shots later on from the comfort of your couch. Or create captivating camera movements, swiping from that gorgeous menacing face, admiring my new bronze wheels, or checking out the road ahead, and easily export vertically or horizontally.
And if you want a free gift with your camera, like a selfie stick or a screen protector, simply order one through my link in the description. And then you can get awesome shots of your bike too. Seriously, try it. I know to you guys it probably felt like a really long process, but trust me, trying to rebuild a crashed bike like this in just 2 months feels really rushed when you're doing it, but it is only the first time I've ever done it. The first quirk you might notice is that I couldn't get these trim panels to sit inside the fairings nicely. I'm hoping the more it's in the sun, the more it molds, and soon I'll be able to clip them in perfectly, but for now, that's the first issue. But let's see an issue that is no longer an issue. Oh, we need fuel, damn it. I mean, yes, it sounds good, especially for a fake SC, but you might notice there's no smoke coming out of it. Cool, right? Those wheels are definitely the centerpiece of this bike though. So here is issue number 2. We have a check engine light because obviously that day we tried to start it without any spark plugs in it. It wasn't too impressed with that. But the worst design is that now that there's this check engine light on the dash, you can't see the coolant temperature, which seems like a bit of a flaw. You have a problem with your engine, but you're stopping me from seeing if there are any other problems with my engine. Great job, Honda. But let's go down here in a quiet industrial area where if things fall off, we can fetch them and we won't disturb anyone, hopefully. Just gonna spin around here and go back the way we came. Let's do the handling test. I love this game. And obviously, I always get the position of my gear lever wrong. It's way too high. That's an easy fix, but I have to say that the blipper and the quick shifter are brilliant. They're really smooth. So far, it just feels like a regular motorcycle. The riding position is super relaxed compared to my R1. But it's very nimble, very light, changes direction very quickly. Also the on-off throttle, okay, I made that look bad, but it's really smooth. Obviously I'm comparing it to an R1, which Yamaha are famous for rough throttle response. The brakes are good. I mean, oh, that's actually our third issue I should tell you about. The front brakes are good. I forgot that I had to disconnect the rear brake line to get it through that subframe, so I haven't bled it, so there's no back brake pressure whatsoever. There is no replacement for displacement. It does feel a little underpowered down low compared to my R1, but remember the R1 is geared for the racetrack, so it will naturally accelerate faster. This definitely feels like it makes good power at the top end. The handlebars on this are also like super nice and wide, and they're really far out, which feels super good. But besides those issues that I've pointed out, it's just a regular bike. It's doing everything I ask of it, and it's really satisfying. So yes, we went over budget. All in, this cost $9,300, making it around $3,000 cheaper than a regular second-hand one. And if we hadn't been ripped off by that subframe, it would have been even cheaper. And yes, it still has a clean title. But is it worth $12,000? That is where things get tricky. It still has a complicated history. The fairings aren't OEM, and it's had repairs made to it all around. I'll be the first to admit that it isn't perfect. With that said, it does have a lot of OEM parts, and dare I say, I think it's in better condition than before it crashed. The only question that should matter in my opinion is this: is it still just as fun as a regular bike, but for $3,000 less?
And the answer to that is without a doubt yes. Plus, you can't put a price tag on everything I've learned along the way. And this is something I'd love to do, even if it cost me money. That's what being a petrolhead is all about.
But anyway, let me know what you think of the completed CBR and whether you think it was worth rebuilding or not. Subscribe so you don't miss this going head to head with my R1, and I'll see you on the next ride.